Good morning. Welcome everyone to our virtual press conference about the recent decision at the State Office of Administrative Hearings related to an application by Port Arthur LNG for an air permit for its LNG facility in Port Arthur, Texas. We're here today with our client, Port Arthur Community Action Network and its president and founder, John Beard Jr., as well as several of the attorneys from both Lone Star Legal Aid and the Environmental Integrity Project that have been working on this case for the past several years. And we are excited to be here to answer your questions, give you a little brief background on the decision, and hopefully spread the word that there are groups like Port Arthur Community Action Network standing up to the LNG build out across the Gulf Coast. My name is Amy Den. I'm the managing attorney of the Lone Star Legal Aid Environmental Justice Team, which is part of our Equitable Development Initiative. And I'm happy to also introduce John Beard of the Port Arthur Community Action Network. John, do you want to say a few things?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Amy. And thank you. I don't know if this is a cold open, but here's what we'll go with, and here's what we'll say: that while we appreciate the ruling from the administrative law judges with regard to SEMPA, first of all, it's a shame that we tried to talk about this and address this without having to go that route. SEMPA was very unwilling and uncooperative in that regard, despite our pleas and entreaties over several months. So it left us no option but to go this route with the contested case to contest the air quality permit. And some of you may want to know why, understand why we did it. Well, I'll give you just a little brief on that. And the sum of it really is that Port Arthur has some of the worst air quality in all of Southeast Texas, with the largest refinery in the country being there and several other smaller petrochemical and refining facilities, with the port being in close proximity to neighborhoods and communities, as well as tank farms and other processing equipment in the industry. And also the largest serial polluter in all of Texas, Oxbow calcining, with over 11,000 tons of particulate emissions per year. This is very onerous to the community. And you look at the health effects that we have twice the national average for cancer, as well as some forms of heart, lung, and kidney disease, chronic and adverse effects that are affecting people young and old. Then it was incumbent upon us to take upon this fight to go into finding a way to try to make a difference, to try to get it better. Because we know TCEQ never met a permit they didn't like. But what we wanted to do, and that we probably couldn't stop the permit, was to get the best deal that we could for the city of Port Arthur and the surrounding area. So we took up this fight, and while this is welcome news, the fight isn't over. There's a lot of work left to be done still. The air still needs to be in a better status. Matter of fact, it's borderline non-attainment right now. So we need to do as much as we can to help with all of these facilities that are trying to come into the area. Thank you, Amy.
No, thank you, John, for that community perspective. We really appreciate the partnership we have with Port Arthur Community Action Network and being your partner in fight and other fights that you referenced as well. Yes. I'm going to introduce our audience to some of the other attorneys that are working on the case as well. First, Colin Cox of the Environmental Integrity Project.
Hi, thanks, Amy. Yeah, I'm Colin Cox, an attorney with the Environmental Integrity Project out of our Austin, Texas office. I've been working with Lone Star Legal Aid and Port Arthur Community Action Network on this case since its inception.
Yeah, and just as a side note, Colin used to work for Lone Star Legal Aid, so we're very excited to continue the partnership with his team as well, and Colin himself. I also want to introduce two of our other Lone Star Legal Aid attorneys on our environmental justice team, Chase Porter and Natasha Barry. They have both been very integrally involved in the contested case hearing and helping us move this objective forward. Chase?
Thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone. I'm Chase Porter. I'm, as Amy said, a lawyer and Equal Justice Works Fellow at Lone Star Legal Aid. I've been working with Pecan on this matter for 2 years now. It's been a long journey, and as John says, there's still a lot of work yet to be done on this. While our focus today, of course, is on this permit that will be granted or denied at the state level, I've also been working with Pecan at the federal level. There's a parallel process, and that work continues. Port Arthur LNG, before they could construct their facility and operate it, has to receive a federal authorization from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that's FERC. And so Pecan has been involved at that level as well. We're still waiting for that agency to respond to comments that Pecan filed about a year ago, raising numerous concerns ranging from air pollution to impacts on noise and nearby parks and the residents of Port Arthur. And so, as I said, the work continues there as well, and we'll keep up that fight as long as we need to.
Thank you so much, Chase. And Natasha is one of our newest members of our environmental justice team, but came in at a critical time when we were finishing up our briefing to the case. So I want to make sure she gets a chance to introduce herself as well.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Amy. Good morning, everyone. I am the newest member of the environmental justice team and of this particular team. And I'm so happy to see the success that they've achieved. I saw all the hard work that they did as I was catching up on the file. And it's really nice to see how it panned out. And I'm really grateful to be a part of this team now.
Well, Natasha, the fight will continue. And to tell us a little bit about the decision that was entered, I'm going to turn it over to Colin to speak to the actual decision entered by the ALJs and kind of what we were fighting about.
Thanks, Amy. Yes, so the decision on Friday from the State Office of Administrative Hearings marks kind of the end of this administrative process where the state agency is reviewing Sempra's air permit for Port Arthur LNG, and where the public has an opportunity to participate, and we did. And on Friday, the judges agreed with us that Sempra's air permit did not meet the requirements of the Clean Air Act. Almost 2 years ago, we collectively informed our state administrative agency, the TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, that Sempra was cutting corners and proposing to use outdated pollution controls in this plant. They're proposing to emit 2 to 3 times as much pollution as other gas export terminals that have been built recently. So the judge's decision will now require Sempra to install modern pollution controls that many other facilities are using across the country, which will significantly reduce the emissions of nitrogen oxides and carbon monoxide, both of which are toxic air pollutants with a variety of respiratory effects, negative health effects. And nitrogen oxide is also one of the 2 ingredients in smog or ozone pollution, something that John mentioned earlier is a problem in Port Arthur and Jefferson County. Kind of for some context, for the compression turbines, which are the biggest source of pollution at the plant, and which are kind of, they compress and liquefy the gas. It's the biggest thing that happens there. This will reduce nitrogen oxide pollution from those turbines by 45% and reduce carbon monoxide pollution by 40%. So roughly 500 tons per year less nitrogen dioxide in the air, and roughly 750 tons per year less carbon monoxide in the air compared to what Sempra was proposing. The next step in this is that what the judges did on Friday is called the proposal for decision. That will now go back to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, where the 3 governor-appointed commissioners will vote on whether to adopt it or to modify the proposal. They do have the power to change it if they have good reason to do so. We're hoping that the commissioners adopt this, that they require stricter pollution controls and lower pollution limits for Sempra. And that decision we expect sometime this summer. Thanks,
Great,
Amy.
thank you so much, Colin. Appreciate that wonderful overview. John, I just wanted to give you another chance to relay your thoughts on the order, if you had any additional comments based on Colin's description.
Yes, those reductions go a long way. Colin's exactly right about that, and the help and aid that he and others have provided to us. It was essential that we make these changes because the community is overburdened already. There are far too many sources of pollution, and the fact that nothing was being done about them is especially disheartening. The people that we depend on to make these things better, to improve them, we know that we can't get completely away from fossil fuels right now, but at least we can use the best available technology to lessen the burden on the community. But in a community like Port Arthur, which is an environmental justice community, we've just been overburdened far too long, and things are not getting better. And like Chase said earlier, our next stop is to go to FERC, is to relay this information to FERC of what this ruling is, to get their attention. And hopefully, sometime in the near future, we're looking at trying to get Richard Glick and one of the FERC commissioners, and even the Office of Public Participation, to come down here and to see for themselves. Because it's my belief, until you really see it up close, you really don't know and understand just how bad it is and how it needs to be improved and needs to be better. So once again, I appreciate all the work that everybody's doing in on this, because it's a lot of work. It's a huge amount of work, and it takes a huge amount of time. I'm sure Amy remembers quite well that 6.5 hour or better hearing that we had to sit through, just in the first round of that. So it's a lot of work, folks. It's not easy, but we do the work because those are the challenges we take up, because they are to help people. So once again, my thanks to everybody, and let's just continue fighting on till we win it.
Great, John. That's a super segue into just following up on our next steps, which Colin mentioned, which is a decision by TCEQ. The parties are both going to have a chance in June to file exceptions, or what we call objections, to the proposed order based on the evidence that was presented. And we will also have a chance to respond to Port Arthur LNG's objections. That the TCEQ will then consider those. They will hold a hearing to decide whether to accept that judge's decision or modify it. And like Colin said, they don't have to necessarily take the judge's decision. They could make changes to the permit in line with the order. And that will ultimately be decided by a vote of the 3 commissioners that are appointed to the commission. And that decision is made at a public hearing. And so the public can attend and comment at that hearing of the commissioners, and we can keep you posted on the date once that hearing is set. We would appreciate any support that could be had around the relief here. Depending on that order entered by the commissioners, the permit will either be revised consistent with the decision by the judges, or there may be other relief ordered by the commission. They don't have to accept the opinion. And at that stage, after the TCEQ's made a decision, which we expect maybe sometime this summer, the parties will have further rights to appeal that decision. So as we said, the fight will continue here. And I want to then turn it over to Chase, who has been checking our Facebook Live comments to see if we have any questions and answers. We're going to transition to that phase of the press conference. So if there are any reporters that have questions, we are open to taking them from Mr. Beard as a representative of Port Arthur Community Action Network, or any of the attorneys on the call.
At this point, I don't see any questions in our Facebook relating directly to this. There was one comment, and to that commenter, I would just encourage you to reach out to Lone Star Legal Aid about that particular issue. If you've already engaged with Lone Star Legal Aid, just please call us at the number you have to chat about what's going on there. We don't want to get into anything like that on Facebook in front of everybody out there. If there are any questions about Port Arthur LNG specifically, feel free to put them into the chat, or if you're on Zoom, I think you may be able to raise your hand and let us know you have a question. We can give that a minute. Absent that, I'd be happy to pass it back to everyone if there's any other thoughts or things you want to get out there about this, any more details or anything that's come to mind as we wait to see if anyone has a question.
Well, I'll speak a little bit about the proceeding itself and kind of what we went through. John
Sure.
mentioned that there was a 7-hour preliminary conference at the outset of the matter. We basically had to present 3 experts to establish standing, as well as Mr. Beard testified for over an hour after submitting proffered testimony about his organization that works actively in Port Arthur around environmental justice issues. That we had an extended preliminary hearing to establish that step of the case. And then we move forward with discovery, exchanging documents and information with Port Arthur LNG as well as the regulatory agency. And then at the we filed testimony. We had an expert, Bill Powers, who is a very experienced engineer in permitting matters, has worked on a number of LNG facilities in Texas and elsewhere. And his testimony was really critical to establishing standards for control technologies around these types of facilities and looking at the emission sources and what types of control technologies were available to help reduce pollution. And so his testimony was really critical in this case to establishing what a proper standard was for the type of facility for the emission sources that were proposed. So we really depended on his testimony and used his expertise to establish those standards, and that is something that the judge considered. Mr. Powers testified for over a day at the hearing and really communicated well the position that our client, Port Arthur Community Action Network, was taking, that the air pollution burden proposed by Port Arthur LNG was excessive given what was available on the market. So that really came through during the hearing. The hearing then continued for 2 more days. So we had 3 full days of hearing with various experts presented by Port Arthur LNG as well as the agency. But Colin did a very good job at attacking the Port Arthur LNG expert or permit reviewer that put together the application on their grounds for whether one of the control technologies, what we call SCR, selected catalytic reduction, was cost effective or not. And that was very critical to the judge's decision that the control technology selected by Port Arthur LNG was not the appropriate, and that it could do better in this case. And that resulted in a lower limit for emissions on that particular emission source. Colin, I don't know if you want to talk a little more about that or explain some of that riveting testimony that came through, but the judges did do a good job highlighting how well you dismantled the argument that they were making.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, I mean, I think that my main takeaway is that this now goes to the commissioners, and they need to do the right thing and adopt the judge's proposal. The judges heard days of testimony at the hearing in February, at the preliminary hearing in November of last year. The emissions from this is an enormous facility, a lot of pollution. The applicant itself, Sempra, told us that the pollution will, be above the significant impact levels in Port Arthur. Even though it's a little bit outside of this, just south of town, it's going to be contributing significant amounts of pollution to Port Arthur, to the airshed. The right thing to do is to bring those levels down in line with what other facilities are doing. After a long hearing, a lot of evidence, a lot of back and forth, the judges came out the right decision that this facility needs to cut the pollution from the turbines by almost half. And the TCEQ needs to follow through on this. If they issue the permit for this facility at all, they must do it with the lower limits.
Great, thank you, Colin. John, did you do any more questions, Chase, or are we seeing anything?
I've still not seen any questions come through from our audience.
Okay, well, I'm going to let us wrap it up then and give John kind of the final word on where we are in this matter, and just let him reflect on this process.
Thank you, Amy. In conclusion, I'd like to say once again, thank you to all of you who contributed to this effort and are continuing to contribute to this effort. What I think we have to take away from this is, and I hope others that see and hear, read about this, will understand that you can fight these companies and you can win, but you have to mount the effort. And it has to be based on science, has to be based on fact, and it also has to be based on the fact that many of the communities where these facilities are already impoverished and are being harmed by the pollution and the environmental degradation that has already taken place. And it seems like they want to continue to heap more and more of this suffering upon small communities of people who are economically disadvantaged, who are, living at or below the poverty line, who don't have a means to fight back. But thank God for organizations like Lone Star Legal and EIP and others who joined with us in this fight to make a difference and to stand up for people, to be the voice of people who don't have a voice. So you can stand up, you can fight, and you can win. So once again, I say, let's just keep on fighting, because this is not the end of this fight. We still, as Colin said in our press release, our written press release, we still don't want to see this facility come here at all. We prefer none of them be built, because all of them will adversely impact climate change and global warming. And we already see the effects of that on the Gulf Coast for the last almost 20 years pretty soon. We've seen the effects starting with Rita all the way to Harvey and what has happened. And these things are real. They're not imaginary. So once again, the fight continues. So let's gird ourselves for the fight. Take a deep breath, rest if you must, but we're not going to quit. We're not going to quit until victory is won. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Those great inspirational words to end this call with. And we appreciate everyone that joined us today live on Facebook. We look forward to keeping you informed as the case progresses and the fight continues.